Welcome. So I want to begin by first thanking my teacher, Eido Roshi, for allowing me this opportunity to come before you in these robes. You know, I never imagined that, 22 years ago I would be sitting here in this position, but here we are. I'm slowly learning that this, to be able to wear these robes is truly a privilege and an honor to be able to work myself out in this capacity. So I'm very grateful, and deep thanks to Eido Roshi. So this is my way-seeking mind talk. And as I understand it, it's a pretty standard talk for senior students and novice priests to give. Let me see, sorry about that. So I'm going to talk about my journey to Zen practice, how I got here, and maybe a little bit of what I learned along the way. So, how did I get here? Well, the short answer is I don't know. But since this is a Dharma talk and I'm required to speak, I will give the long version, which is love and death brought me here. Now, in order for me to flesh this out a little bit, I've got to go back a few years. And there were two events that I think really set the tone for my seeking. And the first happened when I was 6. I was lying in bed and I had this sudden realization that when my parents died, I would never see them again. And it was a realization that hit really hard, and I knew beyond any reasonable doubt that when they died, I would never see them again. And of course, to my 6-year-old mind, this was quite disturbing. And I began to cry. And my mom heard me, and she came in, and she said a few words, and I told her I didn't want her to die. She said something else, she left, and I cried myself to sleep. I woke up the next morning, and I don't have any recollection of what I was thinking or how I felt about the night before. But I know that that realization has always been with me, lying sort of beneath the surface of my awareness, pushing and prodding me along a path that I didn't even know I was on. The second thing that happened around the same time. I was in the 1st grade, and part of the class was sitting around the teacher, and we were working our way through the alphabet, and we were at the letter F. And she was asking, okay, I want an F word. Can anybody give me an F word? Can you guess what word I threw out? No, it wasn't that word. It was frustrated. She was like, oh, can you spell that? And I proceeded to spell it. And she was very impressed. So impressed that she took me around to the other teachers and said, look what this kid has done. Now, I can't be certain, but I think from that moment on, I was a frustrated kid. I always had this sort of level of angst right beneath the surface. And I don't know why. I think that it was certainly tied to that realization I had about my parents dying. But I was not a fun kid to be around a lot of the times. If you were playing games with me and I was losing, it didn't sit well. And so this sort of set the tone, I think, for my seeking. Fast forward, now I'm in 8th grade. I'm at church camp. And it's the last day of camp, and the teacher, or one of the counselors, is giving his talk about his walk with Christ and what it's meant to him. And at the end, he offers up us the opportunity to come forward and to give our lives to Jesus Christ. I don't remember what happened, but all I remember is I started walking up when he said, "Come on up." And I think for me, this was the beginning of my seeking in earnest, that I was aware of, that I was doing something that I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. And in fact, when I came back, my fellow students who were there that didn't go up were like, "What did you just do?" And I was like, I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea what I just did. The next day I got a call from the counselor, and we had a nice conversation. It was short. He hung up. I never heard from him again. And that basically was the end of my Christian practice, at least for the time being. It was also, I think, as far as I can remember, it was the beginning of my, I don't want to say preoccupation, but I started thinking about my own death. And it usually manifested when I would have to go if I was going on a long car ride, the night before I would just get this bolt of fear that said, "You're going to die tomorrow in this crash, in a car crash." And it was like, oh gosh, I mean, as an 8th grader, it was very disorienting, but I somehow managed to work my way through it. And that type of thing has sort of always stayed with me. And it'll become clear why I think that was kind of an important moment in my search, confronting my own death. Fast forward once again, I'm now a sophomore in college, and I'm at Pacific Lutheran University, and I am surrounded by people who are well into their walk as Christians. And I once again have the opportunity to commit my life to Jesus Christ. And I had been working with a mentor, a fellow student of mine, and he said, "Okay, we're going to go to church today, and there's going to be, at the end of the sermon, the pastor is going to call you up, or have an altar call is what they called it. And I think you should go up. I think you should do it." And so the time came, and I do remember this. I was nervous. I was like, why am I so nervous? And I went up there and I committed my life to Jesus Christ. And for 3 years, it was beautiful. It was great. I was surrounded by people who were engaged in the same practice that I was. There was meaning, there was purpose, there was love, there was community, and it felt like this was it. But then graduation came, and everybody started going their separate ways. And I realized that while I had grown a lot, I still had a lot of questions. And I knew that those questions weren't going to be answered in that context, in my walk as a Christian. And so I effectively stopped being a Christian. And for the next 12 to 14 years, I threw myself into whatever I thought was going to get me to where I wanted to be. I was reading philosophy, I was reading spiritual texts, I was buying the latest tapes from the self-help gurus, I was knee-deep into Tony Robbins. I was exercising and tweaking my diet, trying to figure out what it was that I needed to do to find my answers. Then in about 1999, I came across Ken Wilber. And here was a guy that I identified with because he was a seeker in the way that I was. He was reading a lot, he was doing all these different practices, and he had synthesized all that he had read into what he called his integral approach to human development. And one of the things that he said was, if you want to understand what I'm talking about, you have to take up a practice. Okay, I'm going to take up a practice. Around 2001, I somehow found my way to Olympia Zen Center. I came here in, like I said, 2001. I knocked on the door and I had my 2-year-old son in tow. Jikyo, you answered the door and we had a nice conversation. It was, you guys were preparing for Rahatsu. You said, come back on the following Saturday and sit in the morning. So I came back and of course it was dark out, it was cold. I opened the door and Fletcher, I believe you were walking around in your robe, and Jikyo, you were walking around in your robe. And I remember having the thought, be careful, this feels like a cult. But obviously it wasn't. I sat for the day and it was great. I came back the following week and I sat some more and I got to meet Edo-san. And, you know, as a person who had always been frustrated, along with that frustration, there's a little bit of anxiety, right? And of course, I get very anxious when I meet new people. And when I met Edo-san, immediately there was this falling away of any sort of anxiety. Excuse me. There was this ease that just sort of came over me. And I thought, you know, this is the place for me. I think I'm in the right place. Okay, so that's the death side of this piece of the puzzle. I got to talk a little bit about the love side, because while the love side it's a little more ephemeral, it's a little bit harder for me to grasp, but I know it's much more fundamental in my coming here. It was by and large the driving force, I think, that brought me here. You know, from the very beginning, as far back as I can remember, I have always, and up to this present moment, I have been loved and supported by the people around me. My family, my friends, my siblings, my wife, my children, the Sangha. It was this unconditional love that tempered this frustration that I had. And you know, I know people succeed in spite of not having that love and support from the people around you, and they do it all the time. But I wouldn't have been one of those people. If I didn't have that unconditional love, I would have gone off the rails, and who knows where I would have ended up. But I didn't, because I had that love and support. It allowed me to go wherever my seeking mind was taking me, to look and try new things, knowing that I always had this safety net there to catch me if things went off the rails. I think of love and death as these twin mysteries that just keep on giving. And I'm just so fortunate. You know, it's always going to be a mystery to me to how these two forces have conspired, the fear of my death and that unconditional love which brought me freedom, really, how they conspired to bring me here. So as I said, I started here in 2001 and I threw myself into practice. I took Rakusu in 2003 and I did everything that I thought a good Zen student should do. And it was great. You know, I felt like I was always in the right place. But then around 2011, I started to step away, and I didn't stop coming completely, but I wasn't here very often. And then I think around 2015, 14, I realized that I needed to come back. And I came back for a number of reasons. One, mainly because of my teacher and the teaching and what she was doing here. Of course, the Sangha, the practice, Zazen. But unlike before, I still had questions, but unlike before, I knew those questions weren't going to be answered. They could only be answered here. They could only be answered here. And so I came back, and I threw myself once again into practice. So there's just a few things that I think were really important for me to understand, that I would like to share with you, that really sort of opened up this practice for me. I came to Zen practice with a lot more baggage than I thought I had. And I characterize my baggage as baggage of my mind and baggage of my body. And the baggage of my mind was my thinking mind and how I thought that I could find the answers through that. When I was reading philosophy, and I would glom onto a philosopher that I really liked, and he was or she was expressing these ideas that were new and intoxicating. It's like, wow, okay, there's an answer. This person has it. I just got to keep reading and studying, and eventually I'm going to understand from this point of view up here. But it doesn't work that way. In fact, it was for me a huge obstacle. And until I was able to fully realize and accept that, I wasn't able to get around it, and it was very frustrating. But that wasn't anything new, of course. The other piece was the baggage that came with my body, and there was a lot of self-doubt, that morphed into despair. And I had no clue why that was, because, given my circumstances growing up, it was like, dude, come on. I mean, you had it great. What do you have to have these feelings? But there they were. And I eventually learned to work with those feelings, because at the end of the day, they never go away. They're always going to be there. So you learn to make friends with those things. The other thing that was important for me to come to understand was that this practice required me to take responsibility. From day one, aside from the ease that I felt when I first met Edo-san, coming in here, there was always this, I don't know what it was, this gnawing sensation that I felt right here. And I finally discovered that you got to take responsibility for what you're doing here, for your awakening. Nobody's going to do it for you. And by extension, you take responsibility for the Sangha. And when I came to really appreciate that, a lot of that resistance in my body just left. Not entirely, but enough to where I could take a deep breath and move in a way that I was okay. So, three things that for me were really, really important in my practice that opened up a lot of things for me. You know, as a Christian, you know, they talk a lot about faith. And I always had a hard time with, you know, faith in a heaven and a God that wasn't there, that was in the future somewhere. And I needed a more tangible faith, something that was, you know, I could wrap my fingers around almost. And I found it in my teacher. I found it in the Sangha. I found it in Zazen. These things, the presence of those three things allowed me, and I don't know quite how this works, but as that faith started to open up for me, a transformation takes place where I began to trust in myself and my ability to awaken. Again, I don't know how it works. It's a mystery, but when that happened, confidence in the ability to do this practice comes forth. And that's what I needed. I needed that confidence to say, you can do this. And then the secret sauce that for me was so important, and that was patience. Patience. You know, I have the definition of the patience being one of the 6 perfections, and I read it every day. Steadfast perseverance and cheerful willingness no matter the circumstances. And it was this patience that undergirded my practice for me. The ability for me to sit in the fire of my own awareness when all I wanted to do was run as fast and as far away from this place as I could. It was the Zazen that rooted me in this practice. And the beautiful thing was, I came to see that my frustration was first and foremost just the absence of patience. All I had to do was be patient, and the frustration just sort of went away by itself. And then when I was connecting to all of this, the faith and the trust and the patience, something really beautiful, wonderful opens up. You know, this sense of gratitude starts to creep in, and I realized that there is just so much abundance coming my way. And all that I had to do in any given moment was to somehow pass along this abundance with an open and grateful heart. And it was so simple. So lastly, I just want to leave you with this. On more than one occasion, Edo-san has said, rather emphatically, you must be willing to die on the cushion. When I heard that, I knew I was in the right place. And I have thought about this for such a long time. And, you know, when faced with these koans, I guess, because it was a koan for me, if I sit with it long enough, an answer comes. It may not be the answer, but it is an answer. And the one that satisfies me, or has satisfied me for the time being anyways, is that death is sacrifice. And I came to realize that the people around me were sacrificing for me, to my benefit, sometimes in small ways and sometimes in really big ways. Little deaths motivated by love. Wow, even now thinking about it, it's just, I'm so grateful. And I think that this is kind of what Sangha is. You know, it's a place where we learn to live for each other. I have been a witness to that my entire life. People living for me, for my benefit. Now, it has taken me a long time to realize that, of course, and I'm still a work in progress. But I'm so grateful that I've found this practice and this path, and I'm grateful to you and this Sangha. Each day is a revelation of what love and service can do for a person. So that's it. That's my part of my journey to Zen. Thank you for listening.